Welcome to the VICE Theory's explanation of how SCOTUS needs to consider a definition for life for its upcoming abortion decision, and what does that have to do with water, synergy, asymmetry, Mars Hill, and a filter. By Howard DeLaCruz-Bancroft, December 13, 2021 at 2300 hours, copyrighted 2017 to 2021. The Supreme Court of the United States, also known as SCOTUS, is contemplating the issue of viability for a fetus, an unborn child, as the basis for their upcoming argument in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization. The inability to independently survive outside the uterus apart from the mother or the post-viability ban has been the SCOTUS basis for its 1973 Roe v. Wade decision. This new ruling could significantly limit or possibly strike down abortion rights in the United States. The problem with this legal argument is that it fails to address the most significant issues concerning the definition of life. I imagine you might think the lawyers involved in this case would be familiar with a succinct definition of life and be able to argue it effectively. That is not the case. Viability sidesteps these germane and essential elements, and that is why knowing about the VICE theory, a virus in the code of everything, becomes so essential. Before I explain the VICE theory, let me first address the critical questions that it answers. What is life? When does it begin? When does it end? I developed the VICE theory as a scientific explanation for interrogating such issues. The VICE theory is based on my research at Los Alamos National Laboratories, where I realized that information is the basis for matter, and I sought and developed an algorithm that replicates defects in graphene at the quantum level. Much of this type of research regarding information being the key to understanding physical matter and how it interacts at the quantum scale was proposed by John Wheeler, who lived from 1911 until 2008. He was an American theoretical physicist and adherent of the participatory anthropic principle, having coined the terms black hole and wormhole and it from bit. He was friends with Einstein and Niels Bohr, who was considered the grandfather of quantum physics. See https://www.physicsoftheuniverse.com/scientists_wheeler.html. I believe that John Wheeler would have thoroughly enjoyed my Los Alamos-based research and the importance of finding that the same defect-causing mechanism in biology called apoptosis has its parallel in physics. This same defect-causing function appears in chemistry, engineering and electromagnetism. I believe without a proper foundation for knowing what is wrong with this world, there cannot be an appreciation and value for the solution. The VICE theory states this defect-causing mechanism is the source for all randomness, chaos and disorder that appears to perform the same function as described in Genesis chapter 2 verse 17, where God tells Adam the day he eats from the tree of good and evil he will surely die. Of course, we all know what happened, but what isn't obvious is that same death process is in everything. It is in all particles, fields and forces as well. No one until now has been able to make this kind of connection using science, technology and computers. The VICE theory demonstrates how the Genesis 2:17 effect acts like a VLM, viral-like malware, with DIM, or death-inducing mechanism, at the quantum level, which is about 100 nanometers and smaller. A sheet of paper is about 100,000 nanometers thick. A human hair is approximately 80,000 to 100,000 nanometers wide. 1 nanometer is about as long as your fingernail grows in 1 second. https://www.nano.gov/nanotech-101/what/nano-size. The VLM, viral-like malware, DIM, death-inducing mechanism, means everything is contaminated, corrupted, and all biological organisms are fatally flawed. There are even more staggering implications, but do not fear. Why not? Because there is a solution, and it acts like an antivirus, first at the extra-dimensional scale/spiritual realm, and then eventually the quantum, and lastly at the visible Newtonian scale. The VICE theory offers a scientific, technological and computer-based analogy for understanding Genesis 2:17 and related Bible verses. In all my continual Google searches, I have not found anything remotely similar in the scope or defined as the problem and finding a solution for the defect mechanism at the quantum level and a scientifically sound explanation for randomness, chaos and disorder. Nor have I heard about anyone who has created a science-based analogy for explaining Genesis 2:17. If you know of someone, please tell me about their work and I challenge them to articulate it. My materials have been copyrighted by the U.S. Copyright Office and registered with the Writers Guild of America West since 2017. Here is my hypothesis. Life does not appear to obey the standard scientific model rules for time, space and matter. For example, the second law of thermodynamics tells us that all materials tend to and move towards decay and disorder. Nothing becomes younger or more ordered with the passing of time. Randomness, chaos, and disorder, or the RCD, reign supreme in this dimensional realm and in this known universe. No doubt, some believe that there is some distinction to whether life is part of an open or closed system for determining any violation of the first and second law of thermodynamics. However, I see the usage for the terms open or closed systems as just semantics. Because those same criteria are dependent on whom you speak. It then becomes a matter of subjective, selective, and inclusion, or exclusion of chosen rules. In other words, if one can make up the rules as they go, that is dishonest and misleading. The VICE theory teaches that biological life begins when the sperm and egg connect with each other and the egg cell begins to divide or multiply depending on your viewpoint. The 23 chromosomes containing the DNA program from the sperm and the 23 chromosomes from the egg combine and are called gametes, with 46 chromosomes to develop a unique DNA signature/identity that separates it from every other living entity and from the parents who provided the biological building blocks for this new being. That is life, and it is not based on randomness, chaos and disorder. This relates to our understanding of AI, artificial intelligence, consciousness or sentience, which I define as 1. The ability to think independently. 2. The ability to decide independently. 3. The ability to learn independently from its collective memory and experiences is based on independent thought and decision-making, or the viability of learning. My definition for AI condenses and directly relates to the 5 main elements of computer programming. https://study.com/academy/lesson/5-basic-elements-of-programming.html. 1. Input. 2. Output. 3. Looping and conditionals, testing to see if a condition is true or false, and cycling through a set of instructions until some condition is met. 4. Mathematical operations, as seen in arithmetic. 5. Variables, and data structures, storing information, which may change over time. This independence of human ability does address the aspect of viability, but I'm wanting to focus on the informational perspective, not solely on the experiential viewpoint. If something exhibits an increase of order and sequencing of informational structure is seen when unique DNA is created, then that object is exhibiting life. A similar process happens when a seed germinates with water, but in the instance of plant life, the DNA depends solely on the seed and the water acts as a catalyst for the increase in order and sequencing of that information and is distinct from the origins of human and animal life. This biological life process functions counter and is in contrast to the second law of thermodynamics. This counter function applies to living organic matter and biological organisms. It does not apply to non-organic, non-biological matter or machines. What is defined as macroevolution relies on the idea that there is a developmental increase in sequenced information/DNA to form a new improved species with beneficial mutations. However, all mutations are random and counterproductive. The VICE theory states the RCD, randomness, chaos and disorder, is destructive not constructive, and there can never be an increase of order beyond what already exists because of the RCD without human or outside intervention. What is beneficial, meaning to help that organism function better or live longer in its environment, are really just pre-existing traits or natural selection. The animals that adapt live and those that do not adapt end up dying. Even if this was true, it could only apply to living organisms, not solely mechanistic structures. I don't really want to go down that rabbit hole, but suffice it to say that modern science can't have it both ways. We can't apply mechanistic rules to living organisms and then flip back and forth. Either we are living organisms or machines. The rules for each are mutually exclusive at this point, as I will explain further. I know some people are working on making hybrids out of living organisms, but thankfully we are not there yet. The U.S. Patent Office does grant patents for parts of biological processes like unique bacteria for specific purposes or controversial genetic samples used in creating helpful medical uses, but all of these are just parts of the biological process and not an entire biological organism. As of today, the U.S. Patent Office has stated emphatically that it will reject any applications for a device which attempts to function as a perpetual motion machine, meaning something that claims to produce or output more energy than is input. It is common in today's medical community to think of biological life as a purely mechanistic structure. But such thinking would require redefining living biological organisms as perpetual motion machines, because the information and sequencing, which can also be classified as energy output, is greater than what is input. As organisms develop, they reach maturation where they no longer continue to increase in sequencing DNA and stop growing and become subject to apoptosis and begin the slow decline towards death, but they still have numerous cellular, neural, chemical and synaptic activity that consumes energy. There continues to be an increase in data within the brain, which is seen as collective memory and experiences for thoughts and decisions. This part can be understood as consciousness, or in computer terms AI or artificial intelligence, which I will elaborate upon later, as it is difficult to quantify the increase in data within the brain, such as memory or information learned. The loss of brain activity is used to determine viability for the decision to terminate a human life by disconnecting it from any life support system. However, since we do not have a legal definition for how and when life begins, termination becomes problematic, because people can and do recover from being brain dead. https://kgov.com/brain-dead-patients-who-have-recovered. More simply put, any biological organism that exhibits life would have to be defined as a perpetual motion machine. But if it were purely a machine structure, as medical science has been propagating, this would be considered unacceptable and an impossibility by the U.S. Patent Office, and yet the inconsistency exists. That is why there needs to be more interdisciplinary studies and collaboration between the sciences. You see this idea of humans as machines being played out in double-blind pharmaceutical studies where the placebo effect is not understood. And yet this can encompass anywhere from 15% to as high as 70% depending on the product being tested. And because of the limitations of the current medical model to only see humans as machines, all of these placebo-based responses are thrown out. We can also mimic biological functions in computer programs to simulate living organisms with increasing capabilities, and some would mistakenly call this an evolutionary process. However, these programs exist within computers that are sustained by humans to have utility, and they need electricity, shelter, and ongoing input for functionality. So computer programs are not self-sustaining and do not have viability, which is part of the life process, because they do not have an independent existence apart from the computer, which is maintained by humans. Let's be clear, viability isn't the definition for life, but it is an expression of life that already exists. When someone is dying, they are not capable of sustaining any of their biological processes or functions independently. Once the life process has begun, then the life form is subject to the randomness, chaos, and disorder that overwhelmingly prevails in this universe, in this dimensional realm. Initially, all life forms must become viable for ongoing existence. As life continues to develop within this dimensional realm, and this universe, the physical existence of the DNA, information/sequenced code, becomes affected by the ravages of randomness, chaos, and disorder, the RCD. Cancer, bacteria, viruses, and loss of function exhibited by damage, injury, or attack by another organism illustrate the death mechanisms or death processes that the VICE theory describes as the VLM, viral-like malware, and the DIM, death-inducing mechanism, that can destroy life and thereby cause it to no longer exist in this dimensional realm, this world and this universe. If some element of life continues after death in a different form, it is subject to debate for some, but a known quantity because of my understanding of the VICE theory, which is a biblical analogy using science, computers and technology. Is there some difference between the life of humans from animals or plants? If so, what is it that separates us? It doesn't just appear to be in the DNA, because animals and humans share a large percentage of the same DNA. Chimpanzees have about 94% of the same DNA as humans, but the difference isn't what makes us unique, because we haven't been able to find any DNA markers for consciousness, veneration and written language, much less other distinctive elements. For some reason humans seem to have historically exhibited a propensity to manifest a value for something beyond themselves. Some would call it veneration, worship or acknowledgement of something greater than themselves. Archaeology is littered with images of deities and larger-than-life creatures who became a source for spent resources, offerings and sacrifices made to such images or deities that are believed to exist outside or beyond this dimensional realm, this world and this universe. One distinction from humans is that no animal at any time has ever been observed, documented, or recorded as having this type of worship, veneration, or expression of life beyond what exists. You would think if the traditional definition of evolution is true, the change from one species to a different species, that this religious propensity would have evolved from a lower life form, but that just isn't the case. There is, however, evidence that animals react to forces that are undetectable by humans, and even interact with fields and objects differently from humans. Animals seem to be able to sense earthquakes beforehand. Wild birds are said to be able to use gravitational fields and quantum properties to navigate. Dogs and cats seem to know when dangerous events or threatening people are imminent. I realize that some people are not comfortable with the use of the term extra-dimensional realm, but I assure you that there isn't anything spooky about this term. Einstein actually used the word spooky action at a distance to refer to the phenomena called subatomic particle entanglement. It is the idea that entangled subatomic particles can pass information back and forth over great distances in a manner that would seem to violate the speed of light, and this was something Einstein considered inconceivable. The VICE theory has a proposed solution for this dilemma. This is the simplified short version. Just as in a computer, it makes no difference how far away pixels on a screen are apart from each other. The code that runs the program is what matters. Certain actions at the quantum level are at the coded scale or beyond the reach of Planck's constant. The word dimension is just a method for expressing spatial coordinates such as length, height, and depth. Time was later added as a dimensional aspect because it appeared to add a scalar component in quantum physics when it was previously considered to have a vector component in Newtonian physics to spatial coordinates. Einstein saw time as having special relativity and was neither vector nor scalar in its definition, being a byproduct of all the interactions of particles, forces and fields. Time always moves forward, not backwards, because the VICE theory teaches the VLM, DIM, and the RCD cause decay or deformation understood as tensors, matrix function, for all the interactions that comprise special relativity. Even though experiments seem to indicate that a reversal of actions should be possible. But because of friction, the effects of gravity and entropy, something I define as the VLM, viral like malware, DIM, death-inducing mechanism, and can be seen as the RCD, randomness, chaos and disorder, this is not possible. Dimensions confer something scientists call locality, or having a specific location in time and space. Also known as spacetime. So additional dimensions are just another method for explaining observational changes to objects, forces, fields, or informational structures as it relates to our understanding of time and space. Dark energy or dark matter are just man-made descriptions for effects that cannot be directly observed and measured in real time, yet have a profound effect on our universe and are thought to comprise 95% of everything that exists. https://science.nasa.gov/astrophysics/focus-areas/what-is-dark-energy. Why should this be any different from other aspects of life that we cannot directly measure but we know exist? We cannot measure love or hate, but we believe they are real aspects of existing qualities in this world and this dimensional realm, and this universe. Within the standard model of science, it is believed that our measurable, observable universe comprises only about 5% of all matter and energy that exists. The remainder is not directly measurable, observable, and only known by the effects left behind by its changes to other objects, to include particles, forces and fields. So my question is, if a score of 5% is attained on a test, what kind of grade do you think that person would be awarded? And yet this 5% is all we can directly measure and observe. So I do think we should all be more humble about how everything in this universe works, and no one should shy away from using the wording extra-dimensional to describe the possibility of biological aspects to include consciousness, love, and their diametric counterparts, which seem to fulfill the role that antimatter plays out in physics. There just isn't an acceptable method to describe aspects that traditional science is unwilling to tackle. My work at Los Alamos National Laboratories, LANL, yielded an expected similar response from all the scientists I spoke to. No one I spoke with believed that consciousness, love, faith, or hope could be scientifically measured using the standard scientific model for research. Of course, Los Alamos isn't that type of laboratory, but you would think there would be at least a consideration for innovative investigation. I call this the forest from the trees myopia. One can get so bogged down in the technical and scientific details they are not able to see the forest from the trees. It would seem that these aspects are described as being beyond the realm of standard classification. Yet, there are other scientists who are willing to tackle, define and experiment with these seemingly extra-dimensional aspects of our existence. I just need to be in a different time and place, and I was hoping for a longer-term collaboration at LAM to meet more scientists. So we find ourselves dealing with phenomena not easily described but easily experienced. For the time I will do my best to use analogies, parallels, and comparisons to draw upon existing truths to help understand, define and simplify the phenomena we experience as life and death, along with how to define either or both. One of the issues related to scientific collaboration is understanding the definition of synergy. For a biblical analogy, let's look at Proverbs chapter 20 verse 5. Wisdom in the heart of man is like a deep well, and the man of understanding shall draw it out of him. Do you see the parallels? When I am with someone who values me, I feel validated and appreciated. But when I am around someone who acts disrespectful towards me or exhibits contempt, disdain or indifference, then creativity is not likely to happen around such persons. People who appreciate you will probably laugh at your jokes, and that helps you feel esteemed, appreciated and be seen as a person of value and worth. Unfortunately, the opposite is true. Even Jesus could do no miracles where the people in that area were in unbelief. In several instances of healing, he asked all the unbelievers to leave. Matthew 13:58, and Mark 6:5. Have you ever read a book, listened to a song, or watched a movie and felt inspired, invigorated and challenged to do or be more than you are? This is a limited example of synergy. That person's creativity, discipline, and courage becomes a focal point for the possibility of us being and doing something similar. It is as if we are like antennas that can pick up signals from others and resonate with their emotions, electromagnetic energy, oscillations, wave energy, or pheromones and so-called vibrations. I don't want to sound too weird, but I'm formulating all of these possibilities with a scientific understanding and outlook. It just depends how you use the words and in what context. The how we are affected by others is up for discussion. I don't think reading, hearing, or seeing someone is a purely mechanical process, and that's because I don't see humans as just physical machines. How can a smile or a warm embrace be measured? Suggesting this is just a physical neurochemical process is not adequate. There is so much more we need to learn about, but at least we can ask questions and inquire how everything is connected and how it works together. So let's continue to explore one element, substance, or object that must be present in both animal and plant biology for the existence and appearance of life, and that is water. Water is a catalyst for life. A transitory substance for the activation of life. It is one of 5 liquid substances that expand with a reduction in temperature/energy. All you have to do is put a water bottle in the freezer to find this out. As the temperature drops and the water begins to freeze, it expands and breaks open the container. Water that seeps into large rock formations or road surfaces can break them apart over time. Reference the seed needing water to germinate. Jesus said in John chapter 3 verse 5 that you must be born of water and spirit. He was not referring to baptism, because the thief on the cross with him did not have time to be baptized, and Jesus told him after the thief had made a confession of faith, that this day he would be with him in paradise/heaven. Water is also used to show repentance, as seen in baptism or ritual cleansing. Also, Jesus told the women at the well in John chapter 4 verses 1 through 3 that he was the living water, and if one was to drink from a regular well they would get thirsty again, but if one drinks the eternal living water of life their thirst would be satisfied. So it would appear that water represents some kind of transitory element to this world/dimension/realm. Although it is a substance affected by the VLM, DIM, also known as the fall, it has some possible extra-dimensional connection related to informational/coding, and that extra-dimensional aspect could be defined as something similar to what others say is the spiritual realm or spiritual world. With this definition it could fit within the realm of scientific understanding and take on a less superstitious component. It appears that death acts like or is some kind of filter/trap that prevents large size, greater than Planck's constant or 10 to the minus 35 meters, information/coding from passing into the next extra-dimensional, spiritual realm/world. Yes, DNA is information with a coded-like structure, but it seems to have elements or parts that are of a size or structure that cannot pass through what I describe as the filter of death. Most scientists don't like to use size for subatomic particles, forces and fields, but for purposes of this discussion let's just go with it for now because it is easier to understand and visualize. If the coding for life is information that is linked to DNA but smaller than Planck's constant, and if Planck's constant is that filter or barrier, then it would be necessary for there to be a change for that coded structure to pass through the barrier/filter. This includes our AI or ability to think, decide and learn from our collective memory and experience, the collective data for our identity, to pass through this barrier/filter. The VICE theory states that it is necessary to swap out our old AI, which is our selfish, self-protective, self-defensive operating system, our default identity coding, with its fatally contaminated, corrupted chooser paradigm. But with a new chooser we could select a selfless operating system or replacement identity coding by accepting the universal programmer/God's offer for a new paradigm, or new identity coding. Initially, we attempt to find fulfillment through our selfish desires and choices. However, if we see our default existence as limited to this world, this dimensional realm, and this universe, then we will see the need for a replacement identity coding/information to be embedded into our consciousness as is offered to us by trusting the universal programmer/God and the acceptance of his plan for our life. Especially, since he programmed us for a specific reason and we need to find out what that is. If we do not accept his offer we cannot have permeability, the replacement identity coding that is smaller than Planck's constant, and we won't be able to pass through the last filter or the barrier called death. Scientifically we will not be allowed to enter into a virus-free environment if we are fatally corrupted with the VLM, viral-like malware, DIM, death-inducing mechanism, manifested by the RCD, randomness, chaos and disorder, of this world. Why not? Because we would be a source of contamination for our next dimensional existence, and that is not permissible, acceptable or even reasonable. A very limited but simplified illustration can be made by using the example of a doctor or scientist who would not allow any corrupted testing samples to be placed in a clean and sterilized environment where he was performing an ongoing experiment because it would destroy the results being sought. Please do not misunderstand me, but if someone is mean, hateful, selfish and willing to use and hurt others to get their way and only care about feeling good, how or why should they be allowed to enter into a world of complete selflessness, innocence and peace? We can all exhibit these types of selfish ways at times of weakness, but if we had a choice, would we choose to be this way? That is the million-dollar question. You do have a choice, so waiting only confirms the unwillingness to allow this change. No one knows when they will die, but one thing I am assured of, and that is when someone dies they are faced with the filter/barrier separating life from death and are confirmed in their choice, and then it is too late because separation only goes forward, and the VICE theory states no one can go backwards in time. The VICE theory teaches there is another existence. However, if it is anything like what we see in nature for the scientific explanation of equilibrium and homeostasis, then all those who do not accept the universal programmer's offer for a new identity coding/paradigm/replacement nature/selfless operating system will need to be returned to a potential state and lose their current kinetic status. Why? Because the VLM, viral-like malware, DIM, death-inducing mechanism, and RCD, randomness, chaos, and disorder, needs to be sequestered and returned to its original potential-only form. It is our default condition to be fatally corrupted, and all such contaminated beings will have their kinetic existence filtered out and need to be quarantined so homeostasis and equilibrium is restored to all the dimensional realms, this world, and this universe. All of us are currently living in a temporal state of isolation from other extra dimensions because of the corrupted and contaminated environment in which we currently exist. It makes complete sense to me that anything below Planck's constant cannot be measured in this dimensional realm, this world, and this universe. It appears that the extra-dimensional/spiritual world could only be accessible by information/coding that is too small to be directly measured, observed, or reproduced and unable to pass through the Planck's constant barrier/filter. String theory asserts that super-small strings of information comprise subatomic particles, forces and fields that cannot be measured. That is about the only part I can appreciate. There are just too many other incompatible elements of string theory for me to agree with much more. It may be that the extra-dimensional realities are made of information, that is coding too small to be measured and smaller than Planck's constant, thereby lacking locality, and the reason we cannot reproduce any extra-dimensional elements in a controlled environment with measurable and predictable results. DNA is just the data. It is not the program or the coded information part of the software that activates or runs the DNA itself. There is a field of science that deals with synthetic biology, or the manipulation of DNA using CRISPR, an acronym for clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats. Cas9, or CRISPR-associated protein 9, is an enzyme that uses CRISPR sequences as a guide to recognize and cleave specific strands of DNA. https://n.wikipedia.org/wiki/CRISPR. The point is that synthetic biology uses the pre-existing living code of DNA to modify and make changes to organisms. It does not create its own independent self-viable DNA code and elements. And the viability argument states without external input any such object cannot remain alive. So just using the mechanisms of DNA that probably includes any or all of the extra-dimensional elements that we cannot measure do not make our synthetic biological objects any more alive than they are already. There is no such thing as laboratory-created life. Any and all statements that proclaim otherwise are misleading, inaccurate and deceptive. The most famous application of synthetic biology was using the DNA from a jellyfish with bioluminescence and transferring that DNA marker to a cat so that it can also glow in the dark. Interesting, but the implications can end up developing into moral dilemmas when applied to humans. I hear scientists now talk about Shannon coding as if they have discovered the secret to life. https://n.wikipedia.org/wiki/Shannon__coding, and their acknowledgement that data is in other places and not just in DNA, but what they see is also just data. It shows the existence of symmetry after the fact. It is not the active living, running software of the program itself, and it also fails to address the issue of randomness, chaos and disorder adequately. Why is this a matter of urgency to share this information? Because John chapter 4 verse 35 states that the fields are white unto harvest. Also, if someone cannot pass through the filter of death, then they are quarantined and ultimately will not have fulfilled their true potential. That is indeed sad to lose out in this life and the possibility of a continued existence in a better environment. Quarantine seems to fit the description of hell, and that doesn't sound desirable or pleasant. If there is no sense of urgency to share the good news or a willingness to listen, or promote this urgency, then clearly that person has little valued connections with others less fortunate, and they probably are insecure about their presentation. Because if they did have a red-hot viable presentation like the VICE theory that actually helps others understand and believe, then there would be a sense of urgency. Some are just stuck in their old ways and don't want to go beyond their comfort zone. But for whatever the reason, they and the world around them is suffering because of this limited viewpoint. When Paul went to Mars Hill, he didn't talk about the other false idols he just mentioned. He knew the unknown God, and he talked to the people in their lingua franca, which was Greek, not Hebrew. We are possibly making a mistake by using traditional religious wording and thinking that our righteous denunciation about false idols, such as evolution, CRT, critical race theory, Marxism, socialism, liberation theology, income equality, atheism, LGBTQ, abortion, will make changes to the people of this world. Let's look to the example of how Paul talked to those at Mars Hill as our guide to reach this generation. 2 Corinthians chapter 4 verse 18 admonishes us to not look upon the visible things because they are temporal, but to focus on the unseen things because they are eternal. If we forget this perspective, we will be frustrated in our efforts to share the good news if we think apologetics or politics is effective evangelism. Yes, apologetics and politics have their place, but expecting an unrepentant person to grasp the extent of their idolatry is naive. How can you tell a person who faces certain doom while hanging on to a dead branch over a cliff to trust you when you tell them to let go unless there is something else to grasp? That doesn't mean we don't denounce false idols. That is what apologetics and politics are all about, but that is not necessary to share the good news. This learning what to condemn is part of the educational process for those of faith who want to know the difference between wrong and right as part of discipleship. It is for the believers, not the unbelievers. Telling others what is wrong is necessary, but it is not the good news. Yes, we are trying to reach the undecided, uncommitted and those hanging in the balance, but they too are in need of something to hang on to and grasp. The VICE theory states 1/3 of the world's population are so self-centered that no change for them is possible because they are hopelessly addicted to their 5 physical senses. There is another 1/3 that will and have committed to swapping out their selfish operating system with a selfless-based one, and they are willing to trust the universal programmer/God to provide a plan they are willing to follow, but it is not based on their 5 physical senses. As stated in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 7, the just shall walk by faith and not by sight. Another 1/3 of the world hangs in the balance and sways back and forth between change and comfort. This is the group of people we seek to reach and connect to with the truth. We are banging our heads against the wall to think that an internal memo created for members of an organization will be understood by those outside the membership. Such thinking is futile and does not work, nor is it effective. Who is your audience and what do you spend the most of your time doing? Do you have a Mars Hill approach to today's false idols? If so, what is it? Speaking of false idols, let's talk about asymmetry and its opposite. Symmetry is defined as geometric order, proportionality, and harmony. Asymmetry is seen in objects to include music, actions, or graphical descriptions portrayed as skulls and bones, if not used for medical purposes, or other death and fear-based, creepy, scary, depressing art and music. Until now there wasn't a scientific method for explaining what was controlling, foreboding, morbid, dark, fearful, scary and creepy. However, the VICE theory can clearly show that such art, music, objects and behavior lack symmetry. This takes it out of the realm of pure subjectivity and provides a scientific morality based on life versus death. Symmetrical behavior is that which gives selflessly to others. It is not selfish, self-centered or sensual-based, appealing solely to the 5 physical senses. It brings out the best in ourselves and others. It promotes life, health and joy. Using that simple explanation, it is easy to distinguish between symmetry, which is based on life, and asymmetry, which is based on death. I have acquired anecdotal information about persons who suffered a violent death and how such asymmetry appeared in their social media feeds and that manifested in their life choices and ultimate demise. This is the same type of asymmetry that can be understood as it relates to the standard scientific model and an explanation for randomness, chaos, and disorder, or RCD, which the VICE theory says is the death-based VLM, viral-like malware, DIM, death-inducing mechanism, which unfortunately is our default condition. The more randomness, chaos, and disorder one invites into their life, then the more likely they will suffer the consequences for those actions, decisions, and behaviors. It is no secret that daredevils are more likely to die by that same type of risky behavior. The statistics are compelling. The more asymmetric, destructive behavior exhibited, the more likely one increases their chance and possibilities for early death. This includes attacks by viruses, bacteria, random weather, catastrophic events and acts of violence. What hasn't been common knowledge until now is how the accumulation of asymmetry can be a force multiplier for such acts of randomness, chaos, and disorder, RCD. If it helps, let's picture asymmetrical art, on paper, a computer or human skin as a tattoo, music, self-gratifying, selfish, fear-based or evil behavior as a portal to a dark, death-based dimension. The portal gets bigger and stronger with every object and act of defiance away from the universal programmer/God's protection and plan for one's life. Also, I want to avoid the misuse of the words like harmonic frequencies or vibrations and use a science-based explanation to demonstrate how synergy works at a personal level to match Proverbs chapter 20 verse 5. For this example I will use tuning forks to help illustrate the point. When the first tuning fork is vibrating or emitting a sound frequency/musical note, and a second tuning fork is placed near the first which acts as a transmitting antenna, the second is not moving at first but it acts as a receiving antenna, and soon both tuning forks are oscillating, vibrating and resonating with the same electromagnetic frequency/musical note. This is similar to what personal synergy or Proverbs chapter 20 verse 5 is about. When you are with someone who you value and they are emitting ideas, emotions and ultimately energy that resonates, something valued and appreciated, you will feel inspired to think, feel and sense more than the sum of its parts. That is what is being experienced at that moment, while you are with that person. You are inspired, challenged, and invigorated beyond your resources. You suddenly come to new conclusions, ideas, thoughts, and feelings, and that is when synergy, or Proverbs chapter 20 verse 5, is happening and something to be sought after. This develops from being in a healthy, respectful, valued relationship with another person. Otherwise, if the feeling, response, and appreciation isn't mutual, there is a selfish, possessive, self-gratifying relationship at work, and one based on the stimulation of the 5 physical senses, or asymmetry. Just wanting to feel good is selfish and a sign that the relationship is headed down a one-way, dead-end street. The idea of all objects, symmetrical and asymmetrical, acting like antennas to transmit or receive information relates to and explains random particle motion caused by kinetic energy, also known as Brownian motion. In quantum terms, it is described as potential and kinetic energy, and is understood by something called Hamiltonian, which is a term that details the energy of a system as a harmonic oscillation, or wave function, that fluctuates between various energy states. See wave-particle duality. To put this in layman's terms, everything has energy that causes oscillations, and wave functions. We call these vibrations, and they can be measured, observed, and repeated with the same conditions. If you lay down a sound system speaker on its back with the cover removed and put a light layer of sand on the speaker cone, you can observe different patterns forming depending on the musical note or frequency being emitted. This same phenomenon happens for all materials and objects. The sum total of the materials that comprise the object can have a resonant frequency. If you have ever seen the historical footage of the Galloping Gertie Bridge, also known as the Tacoma Narrows Bridge located in Tacoma, Washington, you will know what I mean. https://www.youtube.com/watch?v=k or u capital K capital R lowercase ut capital A lowercase t0 uppercases FIGA. The wind speed matched the harmonic frequency for the sum total and shape of all the materials on the bridge span, and soon the span began to oscillate. It started to look like a wave pattern you might see in an oscilloscope, moving up and down, while increasing in intensity until eventually collapsing. Even soldiers are told to walk randomly and not march or be in step over any span structure for fear of the same potential damaging oscillations. Why is that important, and what does that mean for us today? Because asymmetrical art, skulls, and bones, not used for medical purposes, death-based art, selfish, sensual, depressing music, books, and movies can cause an increase in VLM, viral-like malware, DIM, death-inducing mechanism, and RCD, randomness, chaos and disorder, that will short-circuit your life and negatively affect you and those who look to your leadership and are under your authority. It means that everything that physically exists in this world, dimensional realm, the universe has potential, and exhibits kinetic energy at the quantum level. This energy radiates and can be measured as molecular momentum. Also, all physical objects have dimensional aspects such as length, width, height, and tensor components known as time, the period in which they exist. These properties make them perfect vehicles for receiving and transmitting electromagnetic forces, which can be seen as oscillations, waves, and vibrations. So everything acts like an antenna because it can receive and transmit quantum, molecular, physical, chemical and electromagnetic forces. Perhaps, this has more of an effect upon us than we understand. It is at this point the standard model of science doesn't address how these forces completely interact with humans beyond a physical effect, but the observable evidence of asymmetry is enough to cause us to pause, take notice and reconsider our life choices. There is so much more to learn and understand. While the U.S. Supreme Court will probably never address these vital issues of life in the manner for which they deserve discussion and argument, you and I can do so. The journey begins every day when you wake up and realize that you are alive. What you do with your life is critical. Choose wisely, as these decisions can affect your existence and others and the probability for implications tomorrow for where you will eventually end up and in what form. All rights reserved 2017 to 2021. No materials may be copied or reproduced in whole or in part without the author's Howard DeLaCruz-Bancroft's advance written permission. Thank you for listening. For more information, connect to SoundCloud.com and enter the search term Weblopix, spelled WEBGLOBIX. Once again, that is SoundCloud.com, and in the magnifying glass or search field enter Weblopix, spelled WEBGLOBIX, where you can enjoy additional like-minded presentations.